So this event tonight is a collaboration between the Department of Classics at the University of Canterbury, the Test Museum and Underground Overground Archaeology. And it's a really delight for us to be able to combine our fascination here at the museum and in the Department of Classics with all things ancient, and reflect on how that informs and changes our view of modern archaeology as well. So it's a really nice combination of things today, and it goes along really well with our exhibition about fantastic feasts, all about food in the Greek and Roman worlds. Our two speakers tonight are Associate Professor Alison Griffith, who is a specialist in Roman social history, particular interest in Roman religion and cults, but also a specialist in archaeology of Rome and Italy, and she's going to be drawing on all of her knowledge this evening to talk to us about archaeological remains from Ostia and Pompeii and how they reflect the food eating habits of the Romans. And then to give you the contrast, we have Clara Watson from Underground Overground Archaeology, who's going to talk to you about her experiences excavating pubs and hotel sites in Christchurch after the earthquakes. So if you'd like to join with me now in welcoming our first speaker, Alison, to the stage.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all for coming out, and I hope it ends up being worth your effort. I was delighted when Terry said, do you want to do this, and you need to integrate with Clara because she's doing bars. Yes. Okay. One of the nicest set of teaching evaluations that I have are from students in Rome. We were reading Pliny the Younger's letters, and all of the evaluations said we should have gone out to more bars to find out how Pliny experienced Rome. That's undergraduate. So, then I kind of had a moment of panic when I thought, oh, I haven't really spoken directly to the show. But in fact, the show's there, and it's got labels, and you can enjoy all that. I'm taking you out to sites partly so that you can appreciate some of the things in the show and where they fit into this larger picture of food. So, how did people eat in ancient Rome? But we could probably expand that out in the Roman Empire and probably also in Greece as well. And what kind of evidence do we have? On the one hand, we have texts. We have a lot of references to food in completely different kinds of literary sources. We can get it in plays, in poetry, in historical texts, in treatises on farming. So for example, Columella and Cato like to tell you how to press your olives to get the best olive oil. So the references that we have come from a lot of different places. We also have legal texts and edicts that refer to food, and in particular, Diocletian's edict on maximum prices. That's a quite late document, late 3rd century. Century CE, he had to actually set an edict on, or set maximum prices on pork, on beef, on other common foodstuffs to keep people from, shopkeepers from gouging the public, basically. So that's actually a useful document because you can relate the cost of food to the average wage and get an idea of what was affordable and what was a luxury item. But we also have a lot of material evidence. So we've got buildings and fittings, we've got crockery and storage containers, we've got bones, and we have traces of contents in storage containers. So basically, with that much evidence on a screen, which doesn't look like much, just a few bullet points, I could run a whole course on food. I've never attempted it, but it's doable. And the one thing I don't have up here, because I'm anticipating it as a question, Apicius, Cookery and Dining in Imperial Rome. There are several books. Almost all the recipes are pork related because that's a luxury, and a distillation of that from the British Museum. So if anybody is distracted from the wonderful things that we've discovered through excavated Christchurch, you can also have a look at those. Some of the recipes I think are a little revolting, but I leave it to you. So, scientific methodology has actually expanded what we can say about food quite a bit. It's that ability to get trace elements out of storage containers and analyze them and determine what they are that really makes a difference. So I've got sort of the span of our scientific knowledge here. On the upper left and in the center and on the, upper left, center, and upper right, things that we found coming out of Pompeii. The great thing, not a great thing, When you're suddenly buried in a lot of volcanic ash. The great thing for archaeologists is that it preserves food in a way that you don't normally get at sites. So Pompeii is really important for our knowledge. So everybody knows the carbonized bread. This particular loaf has a stamp in it. Our bread is not carbonized. As far as I can tell, that's real bread that's been shellacked. Terry can clarify there. And that's in a nice little display about the economics of bread. Bread gets stamped because there's a guarantee of weight. You don't want to buy a fluffy loaf when you think you've paid for a really solid loaf. It's not going to fill you up as much. We've got carbonized nuts in the center. And then garum is fish sauce. It is kind of fish that's been left to decay and ferment a bit. And if it was all the way through the fermenting process, it liquefies. And I can't imagine what it tasted like, but it is very common. It was shipped around the ancient world. We have it in Pompeii, not in liquid form, so this is partway through the fermenting process, and then it's been carbonized when it got buried with ash. So that I find fascinating. The rest of it, of course, evaporated in the heat. And that brings me to what the garum is sitting in. Amphorae, the singular amphorae are really important in understanding trade. And we have a couple on display in our show. You'll notice on the lower left, just in the corner, this is in fact a place that had so many storage amphorae, shipping amphorae in it, that it is called the House of the Garum Maker. That's its nickname in Pompeii. I wasn't able to research enough to find out if we've stuck with that conclusion. What you have to do is actually look at the contents, examine the contents of the amphorae to determine if that's correct. Those are all actually tipped upside down, so they're all awaiting refilling. And the exhibit from the British Museum shows you the variety of shapes, and that is a scholarly subfield, determining what amphorae you have based on the shape and what it's for, where it goes. But they tend to be, some of them are smallish and can be carried easily, but a lot of them are really quite heavy. And so with an example like this, you've got long handles and you've got kind of comes to a pointy base. It's particularly so you can pick it up and sling it over your shoulder. When you find them in shipwrecks, our conclusion is that they actually stood up in a little rack. And if we're lucky, we get remains of the wooden rack. Often we don't, but often then they fall gracefully as a nice unit and settle on the bottom of the sea. Everything in Rome relates to religion. So even food relates to religion. I'm not going to talk a lot about honoring the dead with food. I just want to put it out there to give you, so that you're aware of it. There are several religious festivals during the year at which you would honor your deceased ones, and that would be leaving food offerings at the tomb. It might actually be having a banquet at the tomb if you've got a big enough tomb. And notice that there's a feeding tube or a libation tube. You can actually pour things through there and push things through there. They've set it up kind of artfully. Some of that went in early. But this, feeding the dead or giving libations or other food offerings to the dead is common enough. This is an Italian example, but you find it in North Africa and other parts of the Roman Empire as well. And I have a colleague in Manitoba working on this in North Africa. They found a whole chicken stuffed down one of these feeding tubes. And of course, all you get at the bottom is the bones. But she actually, once they had the chicken, she thought, okay, this is more interesting than I first realized. Let's get all the inside of these tubes analyzed for the food remains. It normally tends to be not a whole chicken, but olive oil, wine, olives, much smaller things that tend to fit down a tube like that. Okay, so challenges to cooking and eating in ancient cities. I've got a map of the Roman Empire here. You can see part of the road network, but you can also see inside the Mediterranean a lot of dotted lines. So if you study transport amphorae and food, you end up studying trade networks. So those two subfields work together. Rome was a city of 1 million by the 1st century CE, so unable to feed itself based on its own countryside. It had to import food, particularly grain. So grain came from Egypt, it came from Sicily, And if you get close to the slide, you can sort of see what's moving around where. But that's important for Rome. If you really want to disrupt Rome, you cut off its grain supply, and that is a tactic that is used at times. So part of Rome's food supply depends on trade. Of course, part of it also depends on market gardens. And again, scientific analysis really helps us. In Pompeii, where there has been research into people's gardens using plaster casts to get a sense of the roots of a plant, they've been able to determine what people plant. And of course, not only is it decorative flowers and hedges, it also includes herbs and other things that you might eat. So supply is important. Space, that's a real challenge. A kitchen is an expensive thing to have. We take it for granted. In fact, you can't rent, in New Zealand you can't rent without, can't rent without a stove or can't rent without a fridge? Can't rent without a stove. They're different between the US and New Zealand. So, in fact, a lot of people didn't have a kitchen. If they had anything, they had a small brazier, something they could heat food on. So that's because space is expensive, and then there's the fire hazard, right? When you've got fire and wood and tightly crowded living conditions, you have a huge hazard. So all of these things kind of factor into how people ate. Other challenges. What did they do? Did they purchase raw food and cook it at home? Did they purchase cooked food and eat it at home? Did they purchase food and eat it outside the home? And how do we start to identify what's feeding into places where you can purchase or consume food? I have the only two pictures I'm going to show you of a kitchen. Both of them are reconstructions. So we've got a drawing on the top and a British Museum reconstruction on the bottom. So you can see the oven, and you can see how that would work, and you can see the array of vessels that would be involved. But generally, that's a rare thing to find. So, what's it like living in an ancient city and eating? On the left, you have the site of Ostia, which is quite close to Rome's airport, which is why you can see the wing of a plane there. So you can see Ostia right below in the center. It's kind of sawed-off buildings. And that's the outflow of the Tiber River. So it's a big trading town. And it has lots of evidence of eating from two different sources. One, all those trade amphorae are coming through Ostia, so there are a lot of them there. But also Ostia was a town of 15,000, 20,000. So there are a lot of little shops. And it's all apartments in Ostia. Right? Private houses aren't really the thing there. So that's a town where you have people eating outside the home quite a bit. On the right, you've got Pompeii, which of course has acres of houses and also informs our knowledge. So, one of the interesting things is what kind of words do we have for eating establishments? Of course, we have lots of words for plant material, animals, all the sorts of things that you would expect people would eat. But I'm more interested in archaeological remains. So we've got a popinae, which is a cook shop or an eating house. And we have a cauponae, which is an inn or a tavern. Strangely enough, the word that we get tavern from, if you look it up in a Latin dictionary, it comes out being hut, shed, booth, stall, or shop. So something temporary. And then we have a made-up Greek word, a thermopolia, which is a place to purchase hot drinks. That is a Latinized Greek word, and it's not used much. We only have it from the comic playwright Plautus. So it was in vogue in the 2nd century BCE, and nobody else used it. And finally, we have a ganea, an eating house, a cook shop, but with a reputation, right? We've got other businesses available. So we've got this huge vocabulary, and I noted when I was preparing this talk, I thought I'll just look to see what the main dictionary that is sort of the starting place for all of us says about all these words at this point. We've officially given up trying to connect these to actual remains in the ground. So there's a huge vocabulary for these places. Obviously, they all had meaning for anybody living in an ancient city, but how we have no idea how to connect all these things up. You can see the temptation. If if you're looking at an inn or a tavern, you probably expect to find more rooms. You can kind of see how archaeologists wanted to try and connect these up, but in the end, we just don't know. So let's back up a minute from eating out and let's go through the whole process. So one of the most useful or most recognizable things is when a city has a formal market, a macellum. Pompeii has one of these, but it's not the only one. We have examples that look a lot like this from other parts of the Roman Empire. So you can see the entrance to it off of Forum. So aerial view, you've got the green grass and a temple, and then in the upper right corner, you've got this market, and that's its entrance. And because everything at Pompeii is sort of only a little bit above ground level, there it is. But it's got a central kiosk. And so there's some sales going on inside. Notice that all those shops face in, but you notice too that in the surrounding streets, the shops also face out. So it's one of these nice Central European markets, and they've got it for you there in a sort of reconstructed model. When you see one of these anywhere in the Roman Empire, you think, oh yes, I've seen that at Pompeii, that must be a market. And you do tend to find them in a smallish city close to the Forum, so close to the main part of town. So that's a big fancy formal market. With this example, we don't actually know specifically what was sold there and whether that's high-end luxury products because they're paying higher rent and passing that on to you, the customer, or whether that's just general daily items, we don't know. But another important source of evidence for food actually comes from paintings. And many of you may have seen the painting on the left where you have a guy in a temporary wooden sort of stall selling loaves of bread. There are people there that are purchasing them. Lots of analysis done on that painting, partly because it appears in the main office in a Roman house. So it's not in, it's like the master's office where he greets people. And that's actually been a point of analysis. So it's not just, some people feel that it's not just a guy selling bread, that the owner whose house it's in has some connection to this. But it gives a nice view of what must have been the sort of temporary structure that existed that we have no remains of anymore. And you see a similar thing going on the right-hand side in stone. Notice that you can set up one of these, right? You've got your countertop. Do you see you've got trestles here? He's got a basket beneath that might have poultry or something in it, and he's got various wares that look a little bit vegetable to me. I think those are pumpkins. And then in true Roman fashion, if we had just done the bench top like this, you can't really see that I have a book, so we tip it up so that we've got two views going. We tip the whole table up so that you can see he's got pumpkins and sausages and whatever else. But again, that's probably a temporary thing. He can put that up and take that down on a daily basis. So even artwork, or what we might think of as artwork, can end up supporting us on food. Rome, the great thing about the internet is that you can actually visit Rome and Ostia from the comfort of your lounge. And I recommend www.ostiaantica.org, and I also recommend Pompeii in Pictures. You can enjoy it all. But Ostia starts out with this lovely colored map, and the neon pink is a bit washed out, but all the neon pink are bars, and you can see that they're sprinkled all the way throughout town. That's some sort of eating establishment on the expert opinion of the various archaeologists who have excavated here. Notice that there's a little confusion. There's a lot of lavender, which is also thought to be shops and workshops. The main challenge is that when you're excavating, you need things inside the room to actually confirm the identity. So a lot of this could be eating establishments, and we just don't have any idea anymore. So it's tricky. And that's one of the main differences between Ostia and Pompeii. Ostia had a slow decay, and people took things away. Pompeii ended on a single day, so everything's still sitting there. So again, on the high end, a hotel/restaurant. Right? You can come and stay. There's individualized rooms. There's windows on all sides. That's the key there. A lot of people living in Ostia didn't have a window to the outside. There are 2 bathrooms, one on each story. There's 2 kitchens, and there's a stable nearby. And so this is our one guess at what an inn or a hotel might be. And I didn't actually put the Latin word up there. That would be a hospitium. So guest house. There are a lot of elaborate paintings here, and there's a scholarly argument that it's not just a hotel, but a gay hotel. I'm not going to give you that argument, but it's out there if you want to look it up. And it is in English. Now, all these houses have nicknames. I've already told you that we don't know what we're looking at. So this is called House of the Thermopolium, and that's its nickname, and it's been its nickname for 80 years now. But that's probably not necessarily a thermopolium. What are the criteria? You want people to come into your shop, so you've got an elaborate entrance, a beckoning entrance. You might put up a few paintings. So here in the middle, you're looking at the entrance to the shop. Notice that it's almost completely open. You want people to get in. You don't want them to have to come through the door or like work their way past a crowd. So it's easy access, and 2 sides of the counter are readily available. And it's a corner site, right? So you're trying to look for the corners of these big giant blocks. Wide entrance, you've got your countertop, you've got place underneath for heating things, you've got space to stack probably bottles like that, right? You've got those 3 steps. And I like this because it shows you probably what's happening here, right? You can see in the relief that it's got the same sort of furnishings, and you've got probably the barmaid bringing somebody something to drink. So this is what we do a lot. We try and put together different kinds of evidence. You've got the L-shaped counter, you've got a water basin or a place for a fire, you've got shelving, and you've got a lot of reused marble as well. A good slab of marble from another shop is just fine. And how does it all close up at night? Wooden folding doors. So there are people who analyze this sort of thing. Down, you can't really see it, but down at the bottom, there's a nice ridge for where wooden shuttering would be, and often you see places where the pins would go in, so you can lock up at night. So there are a lot of these, and this is a nice example because you can see all the bits. You can see, yes, there's a counter. I can see how somebody could serve things there. But then when you don't have any food remnants left, it's hard to tell, well, were they serving just drinks? Were they serving food and drink? How many of the rooms from this are accessible? Can the people stay and eat, or are they only going to, like an Italian cafe, you pull up, you have your coffee, you leave, you never sit down? We don't know, unfortunately. Same sort of structure of different cities. So this one is from Pompeii, and notice that its nickname has one of the different word. This is a cauponae. Generally speaking, scholars are gravitating toward this being a cauponae, and they're fairly sure of it. We've had this debate for a long time, and notice that this is set up in our exhibit. You see these holes in the counter, right? Those are all storage vessels. And for a long time, people called that a thermopolium, assuming that you've got a fire underneath and you're keeping liquid foods hot. But then they began to think, actually, those are anchored in the counter. You can never pull them out and clean them. So if you've got liquid in them, that's going to be very interesting at the bottom after weeks, months, years of use. So now we tend to think there's dry goods in there, something that it doesn't matter, it's not going to leave that much residue at the bottom. Now, this one's a really fancy one. I don't think toward the back you'll be able to see it, but let me assure you that the countertop is actually nicely linked, interlaced marble. So it's marble pieces that have been done as a patchwork. Why? In '62, Pompeii had an earthquake, and it looked like Christchurch after the earthquake. And to redo the counter, they just took broken bits of marble and redid the counter. I love that. I also love that there's all these coins, 1,385 coins. That's a find. We don't often get that much. And I don't know, somebody's going to ask me how much were they all worth if you add them up. I don't know the answer to that. But what I also like about this, because I've got this other religious theme going, is that on the back wall, there is actually a shrine to the Lares. So you've got it's a painted shrine, but you can see it's got that triangular pediment. So it looks a little bit architectural, even though it's just a painting. And it's got those little statues of the Lares. So they've all got a tunic on and these special little shoes, and they often look like they're just about to dance. And in the center, a genius of the emperor, probably. A lararium is a shrine where you have lares. Lares are household gods. They can also kind of have an urban protective, they're ancestor gods. They can protect houses, they can protect cities. Let's put it that way. And it's a strange place to have a shrine from a modern perspective. Why would you have a shrine in a shop? It turns out when you analyze the location of every lararium in Pompeii, they turn up in two places. They turn up in the main entrance hall to your house, and they turn up near your kitchen. There's something about food and protection of food that's important. So we have a lararium, pretty visible, and a cauponae. And some of you are probably thinking, okay, is this one of the ones with prostitutes or not? I mean, how? The morals are slightly different. So we have a nice example here, the cauponae of Betutius, or Vetutius Placidus in Pompeii, and just one of many that you can go see. Here's a good one that's not in such great shape. Here I've put in the plan. So it's at the very top of that diamond. It's a nice corner site, and you can get a nice view of the kind of storage jar. Even if you did want to lift it up and empty it out, it weighs a ton. You can't. It's really hard. You can also see that this has seen better days. They've also made a re-repair after the 62 earthquake, but this one has not done so well in the volcano. But it gives you a sense of the site. And there's a strong temptation, because it's a multiple room site, to say that there's a brothel. A lupanar is a brothel attached to the back. We have no evidence to support that. That's just perhaps salacious interpretation. So it's the corner location, number 18 at the top. This is not a hot table, but dry goods. So those are probably pickled or other things. And I have to praise Terry for getting that right in the exhibit. We've got chickpeas in one, and I can't remember what's in the other. Both things that you feel like you could empty the whole container out, except that you can't. Nice. The other thing about this is the kind of detail we look for. Do you see up here on that back wall, there's holes in the wall? Shelving. So you've got wooden shelving in the wall. That probably has amphorae and other things stacked up on it. That's our guess, but we don't know. So the marble top, the countertop, as I said, is typical of reused marble. And it too has a niche for penates, gods of the storehouse. So always, religion is always with them everywhere. And why do we call it what we call it? Well, on the outside of a lot of Pompeian houses, shops, everything, you get graffiti. And so the building closest to that graffito tends to take the name. So we don't know that Demetrius and Helpus Opera were here. But somebody named Demetrius and somebody else named Helpus Opera beg you to vote for Lucius Caius Secundus Verduamur. You try spraying that even on your own house, the neighbors are going to think you're weird. But it's really common in the ancient world. And so Pompeii is covered in graffiti, and we've translated pretty much all of it. All right. Now, getting a little bit away from food, because you come out on a Friday night, and Friday, of course, is the night when we're most likely to go out and have a nice drink. This is how this guy dealt with his earthquake repairs, and I'm just giving you a little bit of decorating inspiration here. We have a 4-panel frieze with people, and you can see they all have captions, can't you? Right? 4-panel frieze, and that's, can you also see on that wall that we've got earthquake repairs? Right? It doesn't match anymore. We could just plaster it over, but why not put a nice painting? So we've got our cauponae, you can see that in the lower right. And we've got that nice painting that's now, I think, in the Naples Museum. Each square is large, right? So this isn't a small piece of painting. It's a pretty big one. And the cartoons all relate to bar behavior. All right? So the inscription says, "Nolo cum mortalis." And we don't know what it is he doesn't want to do with Myrtle, but you can take a guess. And then, of course, you get different scholars' takes on it. So I'm kind of giving you the scholarship and the translation at the same time. Is this two real people, right? Myrtle and some other poor person? Or is this a play scene? I tend to think it's real people because of the next in the sequence and the one after that and the one after that. So here we have two gentlemen sitting down being approached by the barmaid. You can see that she's got some sort of drinking cup in one hand and a little amphora pitcher in the other, right? And they all are saying stuff. The one on the far left is saying, "Hawk, here," right? So she's passing by. They don't want her to be passed by. "No, it's mine." And she says, "Quivo sumat, whoever wants it, take it." I don't really care. And then there's another line, "Oceane weni bibe," oceanus, come and drink it. Now that confuses things, right? We had a nice scene going. It all made sense there, and we've got extra paint, extra caption. So of course that has to be analyzed. Does that mean, "Here, big boy, come and get it"? Or is she calling on Oceanus to settle the dispute, and Oceanus is the bouncer or somebody actually quite large? Now, here's where I have to warn you. So we got three figures here. One's kind of missing. Noxia makes tria echo fluid. You know, name it was free for me. I was the winner. And then, of course, always use your Latin to support your English and your English to support your Latin. I think if I tell you that spellator, you'll get the idea here. It turns ugly really fast. Orte fellator ego fui. I was the winner. And the innkeeper, of course, says, "Take it outside." So, I was going to give you a much harder quiz. There's a quiz now. I was going to give you a much harder quiz. But this is often what we're working with, right? We can see, are you with me that this is a cauponae? We can see the L-shaped counter even though it doesn't have its countertop. You can go home and tell your family I brought you out on a Friday to talk about bench tops. you can see that, can you see in the back the steps, the step shelves? Yeah? And then you think, okay, that's its plan. And you think, okay, that's all working in the plan, it's what I'm looking for. And then you get this completely random mosaic where we've got this big muscly guy fighting a guy with a sort of animal head. And you think, are we in the theater? Are we in the arena? Where are we? And why is this bar got this mosaic? Those are the kind of questions we can never answer, but they certainly make it fun. I am happy to take questions now, because that's all I have for you.
Why don't you just hold questions until the evening?
Okay.
We're running out of time.
Cool, so 19th century Christchurch, a very different setting to ancient Rome, but still interesting nonetheless. So my name's Clara, I'm an archaeologist at Underground Overground Archaeology, and I mainly work as an artefact specialist, so cataloguing and analysing all of the things that we find during our excavations. So I'm going to talk a wee bit about what we know about pubs and hotels from the historic record, and then go into the types of things that were found in Christchurch during our excavations. But I thought I'd begin my talk with a few quotes from people visiting New Zealand in the 1830s and 1840s. "What a wicked place this is. Oh, how sin does here abound. The swearing, Sabbath breaking, drunkenness and whoremongering is most awful." The great Charles Darwin, when visiting the Bay of Islands in 1835, remarked, "There were many spirit shops and the whole population was addicted to drunkenness and all kinds of vice." And my personal favourite, "I must especially observe one point as to which the New Zealand colonist imitates his brethren and ancestors at home and far surpasses his Australian rival. He is very fond of getting drunk." These quotes paint quite a colourful picture of life in early 19th century New Zealand, and they're not necessarily the first thing that we imagine when we think of our Victorian forebearers. I think there's always a danger when we research the past we impose our own modern beliefs and views onto the past. And I think that's something that's quite easy to do when we study the 19th century, because the material culture is instantly familiar to us. It's always important to take a moment to remember that the world was a vastly different place in the 19th century. Slavery wasn't abolished until the 1860s. Women didn't get the vote until the 1890s. New Zealand was almost as isolated as you could get, and it was really a mixture of mostly male settlements working in resource extraction-based industries like sealing, gold mining, forestry, and then settler families establishing and populating New Zealand's first towns. This is my favourite picture. It's entitled A Scandinavian Picnic. And knowing what I know about how strong alcohol was back in the day, I'd say it was quite a picnic. So something we see very early in both sorts of communities are pubs. And these can take the form of large wooden hotels or small lean-to buildings and even tents, which were known as grog shanties. Grog shanties are most common in places like Central Otago during the gold rush, where you've got large communities of mostly male workers. This here's the Eldorado Hotel on the Waihori Road near Lawrence, and as you can see, it's the only building around for miles. Moving now to Christchurch. Here we've got a painting of Christchurch in 1851. As we can see, there's a few buildings scattered around the place, but not a lot. So here we're standing by the Avon River. This road is Oxford Terrace, and it's right by the Worcester Street Bridge. At the front we've got the Lands Office. Over to the side are a few houses, and then further back we've got a hotel, which was the Littleton Hotel, and one of Christchurch's first hotels. The first settler ships only arrived in December of 1850, so we can see that to have hotels in 1851, they're pretty much established straight away. So why were hotels established so early in New Zealand? Well, if we jump to England at the start of the 19th century, we find that pubs played a really central role in society. Whilst they were a place to consume food and alcohol, they're also a meeting place where groups from all levels of society could come together and mingle. Pubs are lively places. They were warm, there was often entertainment put on by the publicans, and they were a place where people could gather and enjoy themselves. This is I hate Macs and I don't know how to use them. So this is really important because homes in the Victorian period are often cramped with a high people to room ratio, and they don't have any of the luxuries of modern homes like plumbing and Netflix and microwaves and all those good things, and they actually make being at home quite nice today. So people like to go out and enjoy things. Cool. And I think this real meeting place aspect of hotels is what makes them so important to early Christchurch. For settlers moving to Christchurch, the land was completely foreign. The vegetation was foreign, the wildlife was foreign, the people were foreign, there's barely any buildings, and no infrastructure, and they're a million miles from home. So hotels provide a place where people could gather, socialise, and get a bit of normalcy, and could also get horrendously drunk if they wanted to, like some people did in those earlier clothes. So this here's standing at the north end of Latimer Square, looking south. Up there we've got the Christchurch Club, and then back there we've got the Occidental Hotel, which was established, I want to say 1861, but don't quote me off that. So let's jump now to modern Christchurch and the archaeology side of things. So in Christchurch and the rest of New Zealand, archaeologists work mainly under the Pohere Taonga Heritage New Zealand 2014 Act. This legislation protects all archaeological sites that were created prior to the year 1900 and states that an authority is required if a site is to be damaged or destroyed. So basically, we work hand in hand with the construction industry, recording archaeological sites and recovering artefacts before building developments take place, in what's known as rescue archaeology. And with the Christchurch earthquakes, there's been a lot of development in Christchurch, and so there's been a lot of archaeology. That hotel I showed you in the previous picture, that's it there again on the left, and then that's it there before it was demolished. And that was the result of that demolition. Here we've got the Oxford on Avon Hotel in the left, and then when we got to site, before it was demolished as well. When we get to site, sometimes we're able to record parts of the original building. These are photographs from the Red Lion Hotel in Rangiora, which we recorded before it was demolished. So this is it from the street. And this is looking at the back, from the back of the section. And then a few photos from inside. As well as the building itself, there's many other things that we're able to record. This is the cellar from the Occidental Hotel, which is where the hotel's alcohol and other bits and pieces would have been stored. Here we've got the foundations of a fireplace, which we also found at the Occidental Hotel site. And as well as structural elements, we also find the infrastructure that supported the hotel. Here we've got two wells. The well on the left is from the Rangiora Arms Hotel. The bricks that we found on this well were impressed with TH, and we were able to link those with Thomas Hills, who was a local brick manufacturer. And we know that he was active in Rangiora between 1862 and 1900, but from an 1879 map, which had the well on it, we were able to refine that date down a bit more. So we know that the well must have been built probably between 1862 and 1879. On the right, we've got an artesian well found at the Occidental Hotel. We found a lot of things at the Occidental Hotel. And we know it's an artesian well from the pipe that would have tapped into an aquifer below the surface. This is one of the most interesting features that we've found on a hotel site. So this is an old ship's tank that's been repurposed into a cesspit. A small outhouse building likely sat on top of the tank, although we didn't find any evidence of a structure. And the cesspit was probably emptied semi-regularly by a night saw man, which was one of the fun jobs that existed prior to modern plumbing. We were able to identify the ship's tank through a large cast iron lid that we found on the site, and this was embossed with John Bellamy, Byng Street, Millwall, London, around the edge. And we're able to find out that Bellamy made these ship tanks from the 1860s, and they've actually been found repurposed on several sites in Australia, along with down in the Cookery Islands, where they were reused to store penguin oil, which sounds a lot nicer than being used as a cesspit. So along with the structural and infrastructure features from hotels, we also find the products that they used and threw away, aka their rubbish. As I'm sure you're all aware, Christchurch was built on a swamp, meaning that the ground was filled with ditches and hollows. Sometimes we find rubbish buried in these hollows to even out the ground. Other times we find it buried in purpose-dug pits or even discarded in wells and privies once they stopped being used. There was rubbish collection in Christchurch from the 1860s, but for whatever reason, people continued to bury their rubbish in the backyard well until the 20th century, which is great for us archaeologists. And these rubbish pits are great because from them we can deduce the types of activities taking place at hotels. It should probably be of no real surprise that the most common artefact we find on hotel sites is alcohol bottles. And we find these bottles in their hundreds. I'm about to, probably in a few months' time, start analysing an assemblage from a hotel in Rangiora. And we have about 14 boxes, and they're all filled with glass bottles. We rarely find them labelled, so we don't always know exactly what the contents were, but they likely have spirits, beer, whiskey, gin, wine, all sorts of things. Alcohol was also likely stored in barrels and kegs, and so the bottles we find probably only represent a small portion of the alcohol sold at the pub. And we know that these bottles were likely reused time and time again, as we often find large assemblages of bottle corks at hotel sites. So on the left are both bottle corks from the Zetland Arms Hotel, and we found 336 there, and the ones on the right are from the Wheatsheaf Hotel, where we found 379, and these numbers were higher than the number of bottles we found, at least at the Wheatsheaf Hotel. So yeah, showing that like reuse of bottles. We also find the remains from the meals that were served at hotels. We can find these sort of in two forms: animal bones or glass and ceramic bottles that hold food products. Sheep bones are almost always the most common, indicating that mutton was served. And whilst we find bones from all parts of the animal, those from the front and back legs are almost always the most common. The meat surrounding these bones was normally cooked by roasting it or putting it in stews. So it gives us a wee bit of an idea of the types of meals that were served. We normally find cow bones as well, but generally in lower numbers, which is probably more of a reflection of the availability of mutton compared to beef. We also find lots of oyster shells, because oysters were a popular hotel snack. And as you can see from the cutlery, we also find the remains of what was used to eat the meals. So glass and ceramic bottles and jars give us some idea as well of the condiments and accompaniments that went with meals. Lee and Perrin's Worcestershire sauce is probably the most common bottle that we find. But we also get salad oil bottles, sauce bottles, pickle jars. We've also found ceramic mustard jars and other food jars, but those are a lot more rare. And yeah, you can see, so the bottle with these two bottles here, they would have held salad oils, and they normally sat on the table. And you can see they're a bit more decorative and fancy, and we think that's because they would have been out on the table and you wanted them to look nice. As well as foodstuffs from hotels, we find the vessels that they were served on, and these include tumblers and stem drinking vessels that could have been used for serving wine and specific types of spirits. We're not really able to link certain glasses with alcohols. You could, but I would be a bit hesitant to, just because we find so much variability in the glass vessels, and then we also find the ceramic cups, plates, and serving vessels. On some hotel sites, we find a whole range of ceramics and a whole heap of different patterns. And on other sites, we see a real dominance of a certain pattern, and it's likely that the hotel has set which they serve their food on. So for example, at the Occidental Hotel, we found lots of vessels with the Belmont pattern. You can see we've got a few plates, we've got a tureen there on the left, a ladle, and some platters. At the Oxford on Avon Hotel, we found a whole heap of Asiatic pheasants patterned plates, which again suggests a similar thing, that there might have been ceramic sets. And then we also know that quite a few hotels had their own branded ceramics. Strangely enough, we don't normally find these on hotel sites, which suggests either people were quite good at nicking stuff from pubs, or that when businesses closed down, they were auctioned off and sold. My favourite plate out of these is the Dunedin Club Hotel plate, which I've also got sitting on that table over there. So from what I've been able to deduce from looking at the old newspapers, is that the Dunedin Club Hotel opened in February of 1863 in Dunedin. But by March of 1864, they're advertising as being located in High Street, Christchurch. They carry on for a couple of years, and then they close down. And we see them selling off all of their wares by auction. Now, I'm pretty sure that they ordered these plates Clay pipes are really common finds on hotel sites, suggesting that a lot of smoking was happening. Some of these pipes are quite plain, others you can see are more decorative, like the one in the centre with the Scotch thistles. And we've got the ship's pipe over that side. And then we also find all sorts of things. So at the top we've got a domino that we found at the Wheatsheaf Hotel, suggesting that there was sort of games and entertainment. We also find some children's toys. So we've got a wee toy jug there and a marble. It's always, I guess, important to take into mind that as well as being a hotel, it was also a home for the proprietor and his family. And so it's more likely that these kids' artefacts relate to the proprietor. We've also got a crochet hook in the centre, a coin, and some pharmaceutical bottles, because for whatever reason we always find lots of pharmaceutical bottles on hotel sites. And I don't really know why, but it's one of those things I want to work out one day. So those are just a few of the many things that we have found in Christchurch's hotels. At the start of my talk, I said that hotels were meeting places, and what we find in the archaeological record is a physical result of those meetings. We might not get to see the individuals who frequented them, hear the stories they told, the jokes they laughed at, the fights they had, but what we do find is the bottles they were served from, the plates they ate off, the glasses they sipped from, the pipes they smoked, the wells they drank from, and even the toilets they frequented. And from these features and objects we can get a